When Kelly Clarkson vanished from the stage in August 2025, the world assumed exhaustion had finally caught up with her. After all, she'd lost her voice, canceled her Las Vegas residency, and stepped away from the cameras that had defined her life for 2 decades. But behind the headlines, something far heavier was unfolding. Her ex-husband, Brandon Blackstock, the father of her 2 children, was gone. And for the first time since she'd been discovered, Kelly was utterly silent. Yet in that silence, one person never drifted away. Not her manager, not a producer, but a friend who'd known her long before fame hardened her smile. While others speculated, Blake Shelton simply stayed close. No interviews, no statements, no fanfare, just a quiet presence when the rest of Nashville looked the other way. Over the years, their friendship had survived label wars, divorces, and the slow unraveling of 2 public lives lived under relentless scrutiny. And now, as Kelly faced her deepest loss, the man who had once shared her stages stood beside her again. Not to sing, not to comfort the audience, but to remind her that some bonds in music aren't written in melody at all. They're written in loyalty. Before she was a talk show host, a coach, or a household name, Kelly Clarkson was a small-town girl suddenly handed a spotlight far brighter than anyone could prepare for. Winning American Idol in 2002 had made her America's sweetheart overnight, but it also trapped her in an image she never asked for. Every song, every interview, every note of laughter was expected to sound perfect. By the time Breakaway topped the charts, success had become its own cage. Managers pushed for more radio hits. Executives argued over her sound. When she fought for creative control on her 3rd album, My December, she didn't just risk her career, she challenged the entire system that had built her. The backlash was swift. Critics called her difficult. Industry insiders whispered that she was finished. For the first time, Kelly faced what every artist fears: fame turning on its own creation. Blake Shelton was watching from the same Nashville circles, quietly unsettled by how fast the tide had turned against her. He'd seen what that kind of pressure could do, how quickly the laughter on stage could hide loneliness off stage. He never went public, never issued a statement, but those close to both remember the phone calls that came late at night. Encouragement, humor, small reminders that she still had allies who believed in her talent, not her headlines. While executives debated numbers, Blake offered something far simpler: perspective. "You've got nothing to prove to anyone," he told her once, according to a crew member on The Voice. "You already did that when you opened your mouth the first time." Kelly would later say that friends like him reminded her why she sang in the first place. Through every contract dispute and every sleepless night spent rewriting lyrics the label didn't want, she held on. In the years that followed, the world would only see her bright grin and powerhouse voice. But behind that resilience stood a handful of quiet voices keeping her from falling apart, and Blake's was always one of them. For a time, it seemed like Kelly Clarkson had finally found balance. Her marriage to Brandon Blackstock in 2013 brought the kind of stability she'd been searching for. They married in Tennessee, surrounded by fields and quiet air, far from the chaos of Los Angeles and the flashing lights that had shadowed her for years. She believed she'd built a life that could last 2 children, a home that felt safe, and a husband who understood the rhythms of the industry. Brandon's father, Narvel Blackstock, had long managed Blake Shelton, and through that web of professional ties, Kelly's friendship with Blake deepened into something more like family. In interviews, she spoke often about gratitude, but those who knew her could sense the strain beginning to show. The demands of a talk show, recording schedules, and motherhood pulled her in every direction. Fame doesn't pause for family dinners or parent-teacher nights, and Kelly, who had once promised herself she'd never lose touch with normal life, found herself living in airports and sound stages. Blake had seen this story before. Nashville was filled with artists who burned bright, then dimmed under pressure. He didn't intrude. But when they met backstage at The Voice, he could see it in her eyes. The fatigue, the weight of pretending everything was fine. He'd joke, lighten the air, steer the conversation toward anything but music. Small moments of normalcy that reminded her she was more than a brand. When her marriage began to quietly fracture, she never made public scenes. Kelly handled heartbreak the way she handled everything else, head on, with dignity. Yet even then, Blake sensed the exhaustion behind the smile. Friends say he invited her and the kids to the Oklahoma ranch more than once, offering a place where she could breathe without cameras or questions. No tabloid ever caught those moments, because they weren't meant for show. They were gestures between friends who'd learned how to survive the glare together. To outsiders, Blake and Kelly's bond looked effortless, built on television chemistry and humor. But underneath was something far stronger, the unspoken understanding of two people who knew exactly how heavy it is to carry fame and family at the same time, and how fragile life can become when both start to slip away. In the summer of 2020, Kelly Clarkson made a decision that would change every part of her life. After 7 years of marriage, she filed for divorce from Brandon Blackstock. On paper, it looked like just another celebrity separation. In reality, it was the beginning of a storm that would test her spirit more than anything fame had ever thrown her way. The headlines came fast. Custody battles, property disputes, endless speculation about who was at fault. Kelly tried to stay composed for her children, but every court date, every leaked document pulled her private pain back into public view. She was still hosting her daytime show, smiling for millions of viewers while her personal world was unraveling off-camera. The exhaustion showed only in fleeting moments, the pause before a joke, the way her laughter sometimes ended with a sigh she couldn't quite hide. Blake Shelton saw through the performance. He'd been part of her circle long enough to know what was genuine and what was survival. Friends say he reached out quietly, never offering advice, never pity. Instead, he reminded her she was doing something brave, ending something that no longer felt like home. When the cameras stopped rolling, he'd send a message, sometimes nothing more than a joke or a single word, to break the weight of the day. It wasn't grand gestures that made the difference. It was constancy. When Kelly's team suggested she cancel certain appearances, Blake told her that retreating wasn't weakness if it meant protecting her peace. When she needed distraction, he made sure there was always laughter waiting. To her audience, their friendship looked like television banter. To her, it was an invisible lifeline. As the months passed, she began to rebuild, buying a new home, reshaping her career, finding rhythm in the chaos of single motherhood. Blake stayed in the background, rarely mentioned, but always nearby. Nashville insiders spoke of how he checked in between Vegas rehearsals, making sure she had what she needed to keep going. He didn't try to rescue her, he simply refused to let her disappear. By the time the divorce was finalized, Kelly had become something more than resilient. She had become seasoned by heartbreak, and when she looked back, she knew there was one constant presence through every headline and every sleepless night. A friend who never needed to be seen to make his presence felt. Even after the divorce settled, the storms around Kelly never fully cleared. Fame has a way of finding new angles to wound, and for Kelly, it often came when she least expected it. In 2007, her insistence on artistic freedom had cost her industry favor. Years later, in 2018, a passing comment about parenting ignited a firestorm online. Then in 2023, Rolling Stone published a report describing toxic conditions behind the scenes of the Kelly Clarkson show. Each time the cycle repeated. Accusations, outrage, and 1,000 strangers dissecting her life. Kelly did what she always did, stood in front of the cameras, faced the questions, and shouldered the weight. She never pointed fingers. She promised to do better. She carried the burden herself. Blake Shelton never spoke publicly during those years. He didn't post supportive tweets or release statements. He didn't need to. When the Rolling Stone piece broke, staff members at her studio in Los Angeles noticed something odd. Food trucks arriving unannounced, serving free meals to the crew with no branding, no sponsor. Later, whispers spread that Blake had arranged it, his quiet way of easing the tension and reminding everyone that kindness still existed behind the walls of a workplace under siege. It was the same kind of support he'd offered her for years, invisible but steady. When Kelly felt the press closing in, he'd send her songs he thought she'd like. When she worried that public faith in her was fading, he told her that integrity was louder than noise. It wasn't advice from one star to another. It was friendship from someone who'd learned, through his own mistakes, that silence can heal faster than arguments ever could. The difference between them was temperament. Kelly confronted chaos by meeting it head-on. She spoke, defended, corrected. Blake protected by staying silent, absorbing blows before they reached her. Together, their balance became unspoken harmony. He steadied her when her name filled tabloids. She reminded him why sincerity still mattered in an industry built on performance. By the end of 2023, Kelly's reputation had survived once again. She'd faced every storm with the same resilience that had carried her from a Texas waitress to a global name. But if you looked closer, past the headlines, past the interviews, you could see the pattern that never changed. Every time she fell, Blake was somewhere nearby, quietly holding the line until she could stand again. By the summer of 2025, Kelly Clarkson's strength had been tested in every way imaginable. The exhaustion that fans had noticed in her voice, the cancelled shows, the sudden retreat from public life, it all traced back to a loss too heavy for words. Brandon Blackstock, her former husband and the father of her children, had died after a long illness. For all their history, the love, the separation, the pain, his death left a silence she couldn't fill. The cameras went dark. Her show halted production. She moved quietly between home and family, focused entirely on keeping her children steady while she herself was still breaking. The woman who had once filled arenas with power ballads now spent her nights whispering lullabies, trying to make peace with an absence that fame could never shield her from. Blake Shelton didn't make statements. He didn't post condolences or issue press quotes, but people close to both knew he was there. He sent flowers without cards. He called without asking for details. Sometimes he said nothing at all, just listened. In a world obsessed with spectacle, that silence was its own kind of grace. Kelly didn't need advice. She needed space to grieve without performance. Blake understood that better than anyone. He had his own quiet life by then, tending to the Oklahoma farm he shared with Gwen Stefani. It was there, surrounded by wide skies and slow mornings, that he reminded her there was still beauty in ordinary things. He'd tell her about the garden that refused to grow, about the dog that kept digging up his plants, stories with no point except to make her laugh again. And slowly she did. When she finally returned to the studio, fans noticed something different in her music. The songs were softer, heavier, more honest. She didn't name names or relive her pain, but the truth was there, in every note that carried both loss and release. Behind that renewal was the steady hand of friendship that had never failed her. In the end, Blake didn't need to be her duet partner to prove loyalty. The real duet had already been written in years of quiet understanding, in laughter shared after tears, and in the knowledge that some friendships endure precisely because they never demand to be seen. When people talk about Kelly Clarkson, they remember the powerhouse voice, the humor, the resilience. But the real story isn't just about how she survived fame, it's about how she stayed human through it. Behind the stage lights and the headlines, there was always someone watching quietly from the wings, making sure she never forgot who she was before the world demanded perfection. Blake Shelton never needed recognition for that. He didn't show up in her interviews or her lyrics. He showed up in the spaces in between, in the small moments, the quiet calls, the reminders that she was still more than the storms she'd survived. Where others saw a superstar, he saw the friend who once sang in smoky Nashville bars, fighting to be heard. In the end, their story isn't about romance or rivalry. It's about something far rarer in the world they live in: loyalty without audience. The kind that endures not because it's easy, but because it's real. Kelly faced her hardest years in full view of the world, but she never faced them alone. And for a woman who's spent her life singing to millions, that might be the truest harmony of all. For more emotional stories, check out this video.